It is February 2024 as I record this video. February is always Black History Month, and at the risk of sounding pretty basic, cliche, predictable, I do want to bring some attention to the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Not because he's the greatest Black American or African American citizen that this country's ever known. He's certainly very important, very admirable, and I hold him pretty high on the list of kind of figures that I admire and even aspire to emulating in some ways in my own life, though I fall far short of that. But I do want to talk about Dr. King in relation to a Blu-ray that I recently received from Kino Lorber called King, a Filmed Record, Montgomery to Memphis. This is a very excellent document. It's a 3-hour compilation of what you might call Martin Luther King's greatest hits. It starts, as the film title implies, in Montgomery, Alabama, during the famous bus boycott resulting from the arrest of Rosa Parks and Dr. King's work in that community to organize the Black citizens of Montgomery, Alabama, in a boycott that basically, turned over the law, changed a lot of things, and really could be seen to initiate kind of the next phase of the ongoing civil rights movement that had been going on in the USA for quite a while, but really elevated to a kind of new level of awareness around the country. And it goes all the way to his assassination in 1968 in Memphis, with all the highlights in between. You can see on the cover just some of those pictures, some of those images. And you also see figures like Paul Newman up there. There are some celebrity pieces, little interludes. I'll show a few later on in this video of contemporary performers sympathetic to Dr. King's cause that spoke some pretty eloquent words of testimony and commemoration and challenge to the viewers. Let me tell you just a little bit about this film. It showed for one night in March of 1970. It was a special theatrical event. Theater owners around the United States agreed to sort of set aside whatever they regularly had programmed for their screens to show this film. A 3-hour, like I say, a compilation. It was a special one night only event, and of course once you saw it, you couldn't just buy the video and take it home with you. And it fell out of circulation for quite a few years until decades later it was revived and kind of brought back to prominence. But there are so many scenes here. Of course, you've got I Have a Dream, and you've got King's comments on the Vietnam War, and you've got bits of sermons and other public gatherings that he addressed. You've got the bombing of his church and the the Freedom Riders and Selma. I mean, all of the great events that are kind of rightfully celebrated and commemorated. On Martin Luther King Jr., his birthday, his federal holiday, and all of that. They're all contained in this film, which I think really is kind of like almost like an archive of the greatest moments of Dr. King's public life. Maybe it doesn't show everything, but it shows all the stuff that you might know of or think about as you just kind of mentally scroll through some of those highlights. And if you're a younger person perhaps who hasn't seen this, or if you just haven't taken the time to really study the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this is as good of a place to start. Obviously, he wrote quite a bit. There's some excellent books out there, biographies, etc. But this is a very comprehensive record, and what I really appreciate about it is that it was released in 1970. Just a little less than 2 years after his life was tragically cut short by an assassin's bullet, as he was in Memphis to kind of organize on behalf of the trash workers, the people who, the sanitation workers, I guess is what you'd call them, the people who take out the trash and keep the city clean and habitable and all of that. They were on strike because of poor working conditions, wages, etc. King was really focusing on poverty and the plight of the poor at this point in his career. A lot of the civil rights, voting reforms and things like that had already passed, and he was moving into some new directions. And you really get the sense of the tragedy of his life being, like I say, cut short at that time. His loss feels very raw and present in this film, because there was still a lot of dissension. There was there was no prediction at this time that Dr. King would go on to have his birthday, you know, sanctified, if you will, as a federal holiday. And the mythologizing of Dr. King's life hadn't really kicked in yet. He was certainly a very known figure at that time, and there was a lot of, angst and controversy around his work and what he did. And in the black community, there were the tensions between the more militant, the emerging Black Panthers, Malcolm X, even though he had been assassinated years earlier, his more militant side of fighting back and sticking it to the man and all of that was still very vigorous and lively debate. And there was really kind of two camps, broadly speaking, within the African American community at that time. And a lot of these debates really had not been settled, and there were factions. But Dr. King's legacy really comes through in this film, and I highly commend it as a reference item. Even if you're not going to sit down and watch all 3 hours of it, it's great to just pop in these pieces every so often and refresh yourself and just marvel at the power of King's oratory and the beauty of his cadence and the profundity of the arguments that he makes as he presents his perspective on the issues of his times.
Is and out of resentment, and you are forever fighting a degrading and degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. You assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are at present misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demand.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And I'm walking down that freedom, talking down that freedom, walking down that freedom road. Ain't gonna let nobody step on me, yeah, step on me, no, they can't step on me.
There's not any supplements. I mean, here's what you get. You get the disc inside. You get some, information on the back. And I really do wish that there was a menu that would tell you which, scenes were in each chapter. That's probably my biggest criticism of the release, is that it's kind of bare bones. There are 2 trailers on here. They were made featuring Harry Belafonte. They were publicity prior to the release of the film, you kind of building anticipation and inviting people to come to this special event. So they do have some historic significance, and it's kind of interesting to hear Belafonte kind of making the case, and all of these figures. Some of the other names that were appearing, Ruby Dee, Ben Gazzara, Charlton Heston, James Earl Jones, Burt Lancaster, Paul Newman, Anthony Quinn, Clarence Williams III. He was the Lincoln in the Mod Squad, a popular TV show at the time, and Joanne Woodward, Paul Newman's wife. Again, all filmed in 1970, and they were filmed by Sidney Lumet and Joseph Mankiewicz, who were, I guess you could say, the directors of the film, even though this is all basically stock footage or TV broadcasts. Some of it's kind of in a rougher shape. It's not really polished up. There may have been some restoration done for this release here, but you're not getting high fidelity visuals or sound. It's very basic documentary, but it's very well assembled, and I really do love the urgency that you get from watching this film, like I say, less than 2 years after he was taken from us, when it felt like he still had so much more work ahead of him. But of course, his death was kind of one of those hallmark events that signaled the end of the 60s, and certainly the end of that more kind of utopian, progressive, hopeful outlook that flourished in the middle years of that decade, before a lot of those dreams kind of came crashing down. So check this out. Look for a copy of it. It's a powerful document that I think belongs on a lot of shelves. Maybe not the most cinematic thing you've ever seen, but powerful and even life-changing in its impact. King, a filmed record, Montgomery to Memphis.